I do have a community question that I want to read to you, and this one is from SK Gaming's support Treatz. The question is, how frustrating is it to watch as a coach versus playing as a player? Is it the same type of frustration seeing people int, or does it hit harder?
Oh man, I think it's hard as a coach for sure. Being backstage and watching your team play, it's really fulfilling when they're able to do things that you've recently been working on, or that you maybe been talking about in a review, or trying to help the team learn. And sometimes you just go on stage and it just clicks, and they just do all the right things. And then other times, there's some really stupid mistakes, and you think like, oh, how are we making these really basic mistakes? But I think also just being a player, I know that the game is so much harder to play than it looks like from the outside. As a coach, it's easy for me to say, oh, I could easily do that better, or I could do that better. But when you're in the game and you need to recognize these things in a really short period of time and get on the same page and execute these things as a team, or just even execute kind of mechanical things in a team fight, it really is so much harder than it looks. And I try to remember that, and I know that in my time I made a ton of what seemed like just really stupid mistakes at the time too.
Hey there, this is Lara with Dot Esports, and today we have the man, the myth, the legend, TSM's head coach, Bjergsen.
So we'll start off by looking back at Spring 2021. I'm really curious to hear what were some of the most significant challenges that you faced this season with your team.
I think the most significant one I would say is just our extremely weak start in lock-in. We looked like a really bad team, to be frank. We looked like a bottom team, and we were playing like a bottom team, which was stressful for our first split as a coach. And
Sure.
I thought we were doing decently in practice, but then we went on stage and we just were failing every single basic fundamental thing that you could fail. And my drafts were pretty awful as well. But it was fun kind of really problem solving and getting to a lot of the issues early on so that we could start fixing them early on. I think every team at some point in Spring Split, especially with a lot of new players, they hit some kind of wall or difficulty where you really need to start looking hard at yourself and fixing your issues. And we had to do that in the first couple of weeks, which I thought was good for our team's growth in towards the middle and end of the split, but it was a difficult challenge.
I'm sure you've had sort of this challenge before of like joining a team and perhaps not clicking right away, having some issues in the beginning of the split, but I'm really curious to see how you dealt with it as a coach as opposed to a player. How did you find the answers to your questions?
I wouldn't say that I dealt with it that much differently. It's just now it was kind of my sole responsibility to really focus on the team. When you're the leader in the team, these moments are especially really tough because you want to figure out what's going wrong with the team as a whole and why we don't see the game in the same way, we can't play we're not on the same page in the game, or whatever the issue might be. But then you also have to focus on upkeeping your own skill and keeping up with for me, the individual mid lane meta and things like that. But as a coach, it's just like, okay, guys, you guys just focus on playing the game. I'll figure this out. Like, I'm going to work on this. I'm going to work with you guys on this, and just trying to make it easier for them. So it wasn't really that much different, but I really enjoyed it being kind of my problem to solve along with the players, and them just knowing that I kind of had their back, and that I was doing everything that I could.
And how does this dynamic work with your players? Do they see you as, sort of more like a friend, or do they respect you as a player? Because I know that you've played with Spica in the past, so I'm very interested in how this relationship between you guys is.
I would say I'm friendly with all my players. I would say that I'm friends with them, but there is kind of the I don't want the environment to be overly friendly, because I do think there are moments where you need to say the hard things to each other and have really uncomfortable conversations. And in some team environments, people just want the mood to always be good, to things always feel fun. But sometimes you need to have some moments of not having fun, or having those difficult conversations to really grow. So we hang out a lot. We do a lot of things together, and I consider myself friends with the players, but I also try to I think I'm just a serious person, so I really value kind of being serious in the right moments and making sure we're really getting to the root of the problem.
All right. What are some of the biggest things that you do want to change with the team to come to a summer split already hitting the ground running?
I don't want to give too much away about what
Sure.
I'm planning, but I think I definitely realized that I spent a lot of time in maybe the wrong places or focusing on the wrong things with the team. And it very much showed in our strengths and weaknesses by the end of the split that sometimes it's hard to tell as a coach how much effect you have on a day-to-day, but when I looked at the team at the end of the split, I could definitely tell that our strengths and weaknesses were very much aligned with the things that I had the team work on, and those were not always the right things. In hindsight, they are things that are important, but you can't be the best team at literally everything, so you need to really focus on what are the things that's going to help us win the most games, the most consistently, and I think that's kind of what I realized a little bit this way, this offseason, talking to the players, talking to my coaching staff, also talking to coaches from other teams and some coaches in LEC, just trying to get a different perspective and learn. So I'm really excited for summer split. I think that the first split was just a lot of learning from me and a lot of figuring out how I want to do some really basic things. But this next split is really going to be my first real test as a coach, I feel like.
And you mentioned one thing about wanting to work on specific different things because you cannot be good at every single thing. And I feel like a lot of times players have these like pressures of being sort of perfectionist. Is this something that you've learned throughout your career, or is this something that you're learning now as a coach?
I mean, I think as a player, I always strive to be able to do everything and be the most well-rounded. I think that's a good and a bad thing in some ways. I think for a team it's different because it's not just one person having to learn something, it's collectively players having to learn, but then also needing to know how to execute it in the game and also need to know how to adapt because every game is different, every game set is different, every draft is different. So especially being able to execute all these different concepts throughout the game, even the very best teams in the world don't do. But what I noticed really watching the best teams in the world is that they're just really good at certain things that are just winning their games really consistently. And it's cool to play like fancy, smart, amazing macro League of Legends, but next bit, I just really want to focus on the things that are going to get us the most wins.
Now let's move over to the current subject of the MSI. I'm really curious to hear what your thoughts are on the LCS facing other international teams. How do you think that they are doing in the competition, and if you think they're going to pull through?
You could definitely tell something was off in week one. I don't know if it's nerves, and I also know that Rainover is not there in person, which I haven't really seen too many people talk about, but that can definitely hurt, especially since they said that they were super happy with some of their early drafts. I'm sure that Rainover was a big part of their drafts, and now he's unable to be on stage with the team and also unable to kind of help them through some of these issues. So I think that's really tough. Also because I think just teams from EU and NA, they say that they usually go to these international tournaments and get destroyed in scrims for at least a week or two, which I could definitely say from experience is true. And it's really about just how fast you can learn and adapt to these really strong teams. But I think in week two, they showed up much better. I think Perks played really, really well in week two. I think also Fudge stepped up a lot compared to, or not week two, but the kind of knockout day where they played a bunch of games. So I'm happy that I think C9's played a pretty solid tournament so far, but I think the Rumble stage is obviously really what's going to show what they have in them and how they stack up compared to the other team.
And for you as a coach, is it really important for you to watch the MSI to sort of see what the other regions are doing, or what even Cloud9 might be bringing into summer? Or is the meta going to shift enough that this is going to end up being irrelevant by the time that the tournament's over?
It's not as much about prep against C9, but I think that there's a lot to learn just watching the best teams from every region play against each other. Of course, the meta is going to change a bit. Obviously, they made some changes to the jungle. I think the patch came out yesterday. So there's going to be some changes from the MSI patch, but there are so many things in the game that even as the game even as the jungle changes, or even as champions change, just the best teams, the way that they fundamentally play the game and fundamentally view the game and draft, I think there's still a ton to learn from. And it's honestly just really fun to watch as a fan as well, especially just watching teams playing really well. I think RNG hasn't really been challenged, but just I think they play really amazingly, and it's just a joy to watch them play.
I do have a community question that I want to read to you, and this one is from SK Gaming's support Treatz. The question is, how frustrating is it to watch as a coach versus playing as a player? Is it the same type of frustration seeing people int, or does it hit harder?
Oh man, I think it's hard as a coach, for sure, being backstage and watching your team play. It's really fulfilling when they're able to do things that you've recently been working on, or that you maybe been talking about in a review, or trying to help the team learn. And sometimes you just go on stage and it just clicks and they just do all the right things. And then other times there's some really stupid mistakes, and you think like, oh, how are we making these really basic mistakes? But I think also just being a player, I know that the game is so much harder to play than it looks like from the outside. As a coach, it's easy for me to say, oh, I could easily do that better, or I could do that better. But when you're in the game and you need to recognize these things in a really short period of time and get on the same page and execute these things as a team, or just even execute kind of mechanical things in a team fight, it really is so much harder than it looks. And I try to remember that, and I know that in my time I made a ton of what seemed like just really stupid mistakes at the time too.
And the other question that he did send is just how your cats are doing.
They're doing really good. They are growing nice and big. They're like, I think 12 and 14 pounds, and they're not even a year old, so they're pretty big. It's a big breed, but yeah, they've been really helping me get through the quarantine. It's been really nice having them.
Now, lastly, looking at Worlds 2021, if TSM does qualify, how are you going to prepare your players for the competition?
That's a good question. And right now, I'm not really sure. I think it's going to depend a lot on what kind of team we are, what kind of strengths and weaknesses we have at the time. I'm definitely going to tell my players the harsh reality, which is that scrims are going to be hard. Scrims are going to be a lot harder than they are in North America. And depending on where Worlds is, I think it's in China again. Mm-hmm. The solo queue quality is also going to be higher. So it's really just important that we can learn as fast as possible and adapt as much as possible, while still retaining kind of what makes us good, what made us able to make it to Worlds in the first place in North America. There's like a fine balance between. It's also really easy to just lose completely who you are and try to copy the best team. And I think that usually doesn't work. You still want to understand what made you win in the first place, but also adapt to maybe how the meta is in the tournament, or pick up and learn things from the other teams. So, but I think a lot of it will just depend what kind of team we are at that point. And I hope that we will be a different team that we were at the end of spring, a much stronger team.
All right. Thank you so much for your insight. I'm excited to see what TSM is going to bring to the table.
Yeah, thanks for talking to me. I hope you guys enjoyed the interview, and thank you, Treatz, for asking me such good questions.